Hello there. My name is David from Sydney CoHousing, one of the two co-founders. I'd really like to talk to you tonight about the Sydney ecovillage, which is a project we're looking to start in the inner parts of Sydney. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm coming to you from the land, of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I acknowledge any Aboriginal people who might be watching this webinar. The Sydney Eco Village is what we're calling it, and the Eco Village name may drop away and we may come up with something different, but just to kind of give a sense of its values, I suppose, and the type of place we want it to be. We're going to borrow, obviously, ideas from other places, and just very quickly on the screen, you can see some of the places. Melbourne, that's a rooftop garden in one of the early Nightingale projects. The Vancouver one down at the bottom there has some features that we like, and I'll touch on those as we go through the presentation. And the Paris one on the right uses some hempcrete walls, which are a carbon sink and a material that's very, friendly to the environment. And we want to explore many aspects in this model, in this building, including the materials that we use, and for the values that we have about sustainability and the environment to kind of flow through to all aspects, including the built environment. The three kind of pillars or things that hold this particular vision together are the community, an affordable component, and I want to explore the word affordable a bit more, and sustainable. In regards to the communal aspect, the vision so far is that we'd have a community of 15 to 40 households, involving people from a range of backgrounds, ages and income levels, actively committed to living more sustainably. And it would be self-governed. So people themselves who live there would make the rules and instill the values and have a really large say in how it all works. And people are encouraged to opt into a community of intention. So that's a big feature of co-housing, that it's a community that you're moving in with, and that community shares resources, skills, and responsibilities, for making the whole place kind of work. I'll let you read through this yourself and make one or two comments before we move to the next slide. So in regards to the street level space, I might touch on that a little bit later. Next slide, I think, actually, but it's an important value, I suppose, or component, that we're not locked off from the community or some sort of gated community. We want it to be some place that people in the neighbourhood feel welcome and that they've got some ownership of, or that they can belong there and feel comfortable, and that we're kind of giving back in a way to that neighbourhood through that, making that space available, or sharing our part of our building. Some examples of how that could work and the types of possible partners for a street level space that we're thinking about. And I admit these are very inner city focused, but I'm sure there are other places like this in other parts of other cities. The Bower Repair Centre would be one. Lentil as Anything, the Alfalfa House Food Co-op, a co-working space, which both residents who live there could use, but also people off the street or people in the local neighbourhood, and maybe a garden lounge, poetry cafe. Other ideas could include a childcare centre or a cafe, or just a space that can be used ad hoc. So maybe a Saturday morning yoga or a drop-in centre for people, all sorts of things like that. So that idea of it being a space that is used both by the residents, community, and the local neighbourhood is an important thing for us. In regards to the sustainable kind of value, the vision so far is a self-sufficient village, so that most of our energy and water would be generated naturally on site. Some food would be produced on site through community gardens, chickens, things like that. And that the place would really become a showcase of urban sustainable living, so that we might have some open days a few times a year that people can come through and see how it all works, and hopefully get inspired and want to be involved in our one, or want to create something that's unique to them in another part of Sydney or another part of New South Wales or Australia. Again, I'll let you just read through that and make maybe one or two comments after. So again, you can see really, I suppose, that the value or the vision of sustainability flows through to different aspects along the way. So both the materials we might use, where we might live, so that we don't need to have cars as much to get to, transport and so on. And what we do in the space as well. So like, for example, shared laundries and shared vehicles and tools and so on. So those values, the three, communal, affordable and sustainable, flow through at different points along the way of the project, early on, and then through the building phase, and then through, when we actually live there and coordinate how we do things. With affordable, we're careful to define what we mean by affordable. So there's a kind of policy definition of affordable, and people can, register for affordable housing. We don't quite mean that, although we'd aspire to include that if we can make it work. But what we really mean is that it's not for profit. There's no kind of huge profit margin in doing this. It's more or less at cost. And that there's also a secondary part of affordable, which is that the way that we live, the way that we share resources, the way that we coordinate and cooperate, means that there are savings in the way that we live after we've actually moved in. So there's both the construction cost is kind of at cost, rather than a typical 15 or 20% property developer margin. And the second part is what it looks like afterwards. So we'd want to include people from a diverse range of incomes, and we're conscious of a group that's referred to as the missing middle. So the people who either earn too much or aren't eligible for whatever reason for social housing, but they can't quite kind of keep up with a deposit either, or saving up for a deposit, or they can't afford to buy property. And there's a range of people who are in that situation for a range of reasons, but we think this kind of really fits that group, that what's referred to as the missing middle. There'd be a range of unit sizes, so studio size, kind of affordable studio units, but also we'd kind of tinker around with the possibility of there being like a shared house, maybe a larger number of bedrooms that a few people might live in, single people or maybe a couple, but might live in together. And again, that would be kind of by choice. We wouldn't force people into that, but there are some people who've sort of indicated a preference for that way of living. So we want to try and see if we can make that work. And our preferred model at the moment is a rental cooperative. The reason I say at the moment is because that's what we're exploring, and that's what we're working on with a number of other people, property professionals and people who've got that kind of experience, who are doing the numbers, as they say. But it could be that it's just not feasible, or we just can't quite make it work. So that's what we're going for right now, but we've got to make it kind of stack up. Just some more details. So again, I'll just let you kind of read through that and maybe make one or two comments. So again, just in terms of the first dot point, we have had some discussions with some councils about land. Still more work to do there, and part of that is going to them with a working model of how this could work, and just having that conversation with them a bit more. Like some other places around the world have some like a ceiling on how much you can resell for. In our case, if we're looking at a rental co-op, the selling might not be relevant, but it's just more, I guess, about the principle of it's not for profit, and we're trying to do everything at an at cost kind of principle. And we'd like to use some of the income on that street level activity to go back into the community and allow us to do other things, which may, way down the track, may involve an income that allows us to feed into the next kind of co-housing project. So it becomes a bit of, if you've got a number of those going and they've all got some income and that income is potentially surplus, then it kind of becomes its own revenue stream. But that's the dream. Some of these things are not part of the vision, so I'll just let you to read through those. So as you can imagine, we know what we're kind of going for, or those one or two details are still to be worked out. And these are some of the questions that we're still, kind of faced with or picking our way through. Again, I'll let you read through those and maybe make one or two comments. With the last two comments, points about community housing provider. So we have had some discussions with community housing providers and we'll continue to. We're not completely sold on the idea that we have to involve a community housing provider. There are pluses and minuses, and I think we're just weighing up what those pluses and minuses are and whether they help us or maybe get in the way a little bit. So we haven't ruled it out in terms of partnering with a community housing provider, but we're not saying that that's absolutely the way we're going to go either. That's one of those things that we're currently exploring, and we do have a grant that we got through the BCCM, which is the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals, to help us explore a rental cooperative in inner Sydney in particular, how it would work, the feasibility of it, the model, and just financially how we would actually make it work. With the sort of people that we're talking about, that kind of missing middle group who maybe can't quite afford market rate, but aren't eligible for social housing either. On the sustainability front, some questions we're working through. Again, I'll just let you read through those and then I'll make a couple of comments. So again, as you can see, the values of community, sustainability and affordability come through at different points of the project. So like right from the very beginning, it will influence what site or what location we get. If it's something, if sustainability is a strong value for us, which it is, then living close to public transport will become more important. The aspect will probably become more important. Having space for a garden, that might be something that we really need to thrash out if the site dictates that we can't have one. Like, well, how do we make that work and how important is it to us? So these are the kind of the things that we want and would like, but as you can see, the considerations at every stage of the project, right from before we buy land, from when we get money, when we start to move in, the value comes through at each point. Similarly with affordability, so I'll just give you a moment to read through those. So we can, again, we're working through all of these questions, either things that we've either resolved or started to resolve, or we're kicking around, And the big one, I suppose, is in terms of land in particular, is whether we can lease land as opposed to buying land outright. So we think that kind of tips the feasibility of something being workable versus not workable in terms of the price that we want to pay and who can afford what and so on. So that's something that we really want to actively explore, whether we can lease land. And we know that it's not pie in the sky, like there's other places in the world that do that, and it's almost kind of normal, or it's very common at least. So we don't think it's kind of crazy or impossible, but we just kind of need to make the argument here and make it stack up financially for whether it's a council or state government or some other entity that owns land, why they would do it and how they can actually benefit over a longer time frame rather than an initial cash amount that they might get for the sale of land. So next steps in that first column really about the community, it's co-op development workshops. So working out how to work together, how to make decisions together, how to compromise and how to share a vision is some of the work that we're currently doing. We have some working groups to drive the project forward in a range of areas. So we'd invite you to become involved in that and to find out more. And some community outreach and publicity. In terms of the land or the site, so we're doing the feasibility study on the model, if you like, and some of that as a secondary kind of step will also include some feasibility study on potential sites. And there's other land around that is earmarked for projects like ours, pilot projects, something a bit different and so on. So again, it's just a matter of the constant conversations with council, CHPs and others. And research options for social impact investment sources of government funding. So one of the working groups that I mentioned earlier is a finance working group, and that's some of what that group is looking to find out how we can make up that the shortfall, if you like, between what we're able to put in as residents and what we need to either acquire or build something.